This week on the Communicators, a discussion on President-elect Barack Obama's promise to appoint a Chief Technology Officer. Our guest is Norm Lorentz, who previously served in a similar position under President George W. Bush.
For a period of 2002 to 2003, Norm Lorentz served as the first and to date only former Federal Chief Technology Officer and joins us on the Communicators this week. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Here to join in the conversation and talk to him about these related issues is William Jackson. He is with Government Computer News. He's a senior writer for that publication. Thanks for coming in, Bill.
Thank you.
If we can start, Mr. Lorentz, can you give a short history of how you ended up becoming the Chief Technology Officer for the U.S.?
I had held similar positions in the private sector. When 9/11 occurred, I was CTO at Dice.com, which is an online job board, and my office was in New York, so I decided to leave the private sector and re-enter government. Came back to Washington, where I still lived, and made contact with some folks that I knew when I was CTO for the United States Postal Service, and wanted to just get back into government and help, and was lucky enough to discover Mark Foreman, who was the CIO for the federal government and already in place. And so we made the deal, and I became the first CTO for the federal government.
Up until then, never a position like this. What convinced the government at that time that such a position was needed?
Well, obviously, a good person to ask that question would be Mark Foreman, because he preceded me. But the issue was that there needed to be a new approach to leveraging technology into the business processes or mission processes of government. And so my first job became hatching something called the Federal Enterprise Architecture, which drove technology into the federal government using a line of business depiction of the federal government. So it's not an IT thing, it's technology being injected to help mission or business processes.
And we could talk a little bit more about that later,
Okay.
But if you had to sum it up, as far as your position was concerned, how would you describe it to someone asking, what does your position mean as far as the federal government is concerned? Why is a guy like you needed?
That position was needed to fundamentally improve the performance of the federal government by leveraging technology.
What does that mean?
What it means is that in order to improve performance of any organization, you can leverage tech, you can install new technology, you can get more people, you can train people, you can change capital assets. That's how you can change business processes. This particular position was to drive technology, although I have to say the Federal Enterprise Architecture is a business process version of the federal government, so we could just as easily have leveraged to improve human capital, people, as well as technology.
Bill Jackson.
You've said that the next CTO needs to be a change agent. What specifically needs to be changed?
Well, right now, there are some very specific theme areas that the president-elect is going to be looking at where we do have change management in place. The economy, health care, continued homeland security. So those are areas where the incoming administration is already talking about we have to do things differently, we have to do things better. And so this CTO has to be connected to the leader. By the way, CTOs in the private sector that are successful generally work directly for the leader of the organization and are involved in doing technology injection into product lines. At GM, it would be directly into cars. In public utilities, it would be directly into the network. That's different from the CIO role, which is more the standard day-to-day management of IT. And similarly, this role would need to be connected to the leader and also would continue to need to have influence on budget. Ergo, that's why when I was the CTO for the federal government, the position actually sat in OMB, which is in the White House, but it didn't have as strong a connection to the President of the United States as this CTO 2.0 needs to have.
So where would the new CTO sit in the hierarchy, and who would he report to, or Who should he report to?
Well, obviously there is technology policy set currently in the White House. So you need to look at what that current technology policy leadership position is, and most likely that's something you would look at. Like the cyber chief that's been mentioned, which we can also talk about, that cyber chief reports to the folks who look at the national security in the government. Similarly, it would be someone like that.
As far as the CTO's person for the president-elect, this person would kind of coordinate all the technological aspects for each of the agencies involved? Is that an effort to help them communicate better, to make sure that one agency, has a clear line as far as technology is concerned, can communicate with other parts of agency? What are the practical aspects of the job?
Good question. The practical aspect of the job is that the administrator for IT and e-gov, which is a current position, is the CIO for the federal government and chairs the CIO Council, and that senior technology leadership role manages the day-to-day, manages the technology, convenes the CIOs and the council for the rest of the federal government. The CTO position is focused on areas in need of necessary and immediate improvement. As a matter of fact, if you don't focus this position won't be as successful as it could be. So ergo, it makes it very smart to have this focused on the areas that the president-elect, the new administration, is focusing on for improvement.
Such as, in your opinion?
Certainly immediately is the economy. Immediately and continuing Homeland Security. Immediately healthcare. I mean, those are three key theme areas that the president-elect has, and there's others, but generally speaking, this position is an agent of change in that, and it could be called the Chief Transformation Officer as much as anything, because it really is transforming the way the government does business and produces results.
So as far as, say, the economy is concerned, how does government technology get involved in that, and what kind of things does this person have to address?
It's hard to imagine that the work that's being done in the banking system, in the economy, could be done right now without extraordinary technology. And so the fact that we're able to make the changes we're able to make today very quickly, have the information for analysis, the technology is already existing. So we're talking about putting in place new processes to improve the state of the economy. Those new processes are fueled by technology. So that's where that focus has to be as far as making sure that's properly supported. And in some cases, the technology we have now is so powerful, it can be disruptive in a very good way and actually do things for us as far as collaboration and so forth. And obviously, this president-elect is very attuned to using technology for collaboration and transparency. So it's going to enable a new level of transparency, at the same time privacy, that ultimately we haven't been able to have up to this point.
OMB, which is your former berth, has continued to be the leader in IT policy in many ways. Do you see it maintaining that role, or would it lose some of that position to a CTO closer to the president in the White House?
I think it's a partnership, and I think there's that administrator of IT and e-gov is a critical policy position. But again, this would be a focused position in those specific theme areas. So it would be a partnership. To be honest with you, the folks that are in the CIO positions today in the agencies, as well as the administrator, they have more than an 8-hour-a-day or 16-hour-a-day job today. They're very, very busy. So this is an enhancement or an addition to. And actually, that's what I did for the 2 years that I was in the position. And also, this is more of an architecture perspective. There is a chief architect that's in OMB that still exists, and that position reported to me when I was CTO. And that chief architect manages the federal enterprise architecture, does today, and that's the method by which you can analyze the mission or business processes of the federal government and actually do a very effective investment in technology to improve performance. So that, and there's architects in each one of the agencies, and those architects currently take direction from that chief architect, and obviously that would continue with that more appropriate connection to the White House.
You've described the CTO as somebody who deals more with the mission and injecting technology into it than dealing with the day-to-day information technology needs. How much technical expertise does a CTO need, and how technology specific should his programs be?
I think that, to use a colloquial term, this individual has to be able to walk and chew gum. But if you were going to err in a direction, and again, I belong to a community of private and public sector CTOs before, the folks that I met in those positions that were effective were around improving the performance of the product line first. Their key attribute was then having the knowledge of the technology to be able to effectively leverage new technology and improving that performance. So it's really both.
So would the ideal person that the president-elect chooses to oversee all these forms of technology at all these forms of agency, would it be a person who is based in Washington, who has a good technical aspect? Is it a person outside of Washington with more Silicon Valley experience? Who is that ideal person as far as resume is concerned?
Well, you know, if it was a perfect world, because one of the things that I learned when I became CTO, and understand I'd already been CTO of the Postal Service, but that's an off-budget kind of entity and close to a private sector business model, not really like being in the quote-unquote real federal government. Ideally, it would be nice if it was a person who had been in government, went to the private sector, got that kind of experience, and then came back. If I was going to err in a direction, this person needs to be an outsider with a fresh perspective, who knows how to move performance, and then we can bring them in and very, very quickly with the network get them up to speed on how government really works. And you could arguably say we don't want to teach them too much about how government works because you want them to transform them, but they have to know enough about how government works in order to be effective.
A lot of names have been floated in the process since this concept has been announced. Any names stick out in your mind who might serve well in the position?
Well, I tell you, there's I think a model for how the CTO could effectively work right here in our backyard in the District of Columbia. I think the CTO for the District of Columbia, who reports directly to the mayor, is kind of a pretty good case for how, and again, private sector experience came into government.
Who is that person?
Vivek Kundra, and he literally is bringing technology into patrol cars, into school system, and sits at the right hand of the mayor and works directly with the rest of that leadership team. So if you want to take a snapshot of how that might work, that'd be a pretty good snapshot.
And as far as other names that you have heard, I mean, we've mentioned some Silicon Valley firms, we've mentioned, there are a lot of different names. What's the likelihood that a choice will come from that, or do you expect a kind of under the wire kind of thing that no one's ever heard of?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I've seen all the names, and I'm sure that every one of those folks that was named probably smiled when they saw their name, just like I smiled when I saw their name. So I have no opinion on who it might be. One thing I would say, it's likely this isn't going to be somebody who's been the CEO of a major technology company. Certainly those people will want to aid and abet this person when they're put in place, but it's likely it's going to be somebody who's operated in a similar role. We don't need, in government, as you can see with the first appointees of the president-elect, no OJT. We need somebody that's done this before, has been effective at doing it, and then can come in and do it in the federal government.
And that's because of conflict of interest issues, if it came from?
No, it's because you want to have that person hit the ground running, and the only learning needs to be around what the policies are, not learning around how to leverage once those policies are identified.
Mm-hmm. You've been there. Are you interested in going back and doing it again?
I'll say the same thing that any public servant would say. If I was asked by the President of the United States to serve again, I'd serve in a heartbeat. I mean, most everyone who's served in the federal government and knows how important it is would do the same thing.
One of the defining characteristics of IT networks is there are no national boundaries. Is there an international component in this position, and are there other national CTOs? Would our CTO have peers out there?
When I was in the position, and I can't speak to it obviously in the last few years because I haven't traveled, but certainly our allies have similar positions. They're not all called CTOs, but they have similar positions. They have e-gov components. Some of them have actually exceeded our performance in that area, and vice versa. So there is a network of these fine folks that are in those other countries. And I did travel abroad and meet with those folks, and we shared learnings, best practices, and so forth and so on. So, as you know, one of the advantages of this cyber approach to things is there is no boundaries, and so that makes a lot of benchmarking possible and a lot of capabilities that you can get from other good people.
If you were the person who comes in to assume this position, what would you advise them to do in their first couple of months? How would you if you had to write a letter saying this is what I did and here's what worked, here's what didn't work, what would you advise?
Well, the very first thing, and I've done this both as a quality officer and a chief technology officer. First of all, you do have to take the time to do a brief assessment or look to see if a brief assessment has been done about the current state of the performance of the organism or organization, and what that current performance is, and what are the targets for improvement. If that hasn't been done, you have to figure out what is the problem and what needs to be done to solve it so immediately. So specifically, let's say it was healthcare. What is the initiative that is going to be supported in healthcare? Is it going to be health records? What is it going to be? Find what that is, find out what the current performance is, what the expectation is, and then your plans and objectives should be set right then and there. And again, the important thing here, you can't boil the ocean. There's an awful lot of things to be improved. And certainly what I learned when I was at Postal Service with 850,000 people and so forth and so on is in order to improve something effectively, you have to focus on certainly less than 6, but preferably 1 or 2, 3 key areas of improvement. Then you can make progress, then you can move on.
What did you focus on at Postal Service?
Well, we had all of the product lines that we could have focused on, parcels, flats, first-class mail. We focused on performance of first-class mail. And why was that? It's because our customers told us that was the most important thing. So you kind of dial that back into this position. You ask the president, the administration, the citizens of this country what's most important. You determine where we need to go, and then that's where you leverage your time and your efforts.
This seems to be all about using IT to accomplish the mission, improve situations. But is there the danger that with several crises facing the incoming administration right off the bat, that even though IT can help, it's going to get shunted aside and not get the attention it needs within the administration while they're busy bailing water just as quick as they can?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a fair question. But I would respond with, if you'll just kind of take a moment to think about the things that you do during your day, and other than maybe reading a book or reading the newspaper or taking a shower, is there any aspect of your life that doesn't involve cyber or technology? And the answer is no. So this is not a mutually exclusive kind of thing. When you're sitting down with these policy owners and makers and they're talking about significant change, these days it's almost impossible to do it without the injection of effective technology. And especially with, again, I want to reinforce this, with the president-elect and the experience that they have with leveraging technology in terms of the election, there's folks coming in with a colloquial knowledge of how to leverage these new technologies, the Web 2.0, if you will.
Is it going to be a situation where if you have this brand new position like you were in, you have all these individual agencies who all have people who are in charge of their technologies? Probably there's going to be a little turf warfare, I suspect, only because they were in charge and shepherding their own technology at the various agencies. This person will have to shepherd them all.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you best effectively deal with that? How did you deal with that?
Well, to be honest with you, I would have to say in terms of the most effective partners that I had when I was in this position were the folks who were the careerists and the folks that were operating the existing technology in the agencies. When things got a little haywire, and you all have already brought this up, is when there's conflicting policies. There's so many different policy changes on the table that it's not exactly clear where to start. And so that's why starting up front, you have to focus on the things that are most important to the incoming administration. It's my experience if you do that, you have the power of budget, which I had. And by the way, the current business process that's used for leveraging technology still goes to the federal enterprise architecture and says, exactly what are you doing? Are you partnering with another agency in this effort? If you are, you're more than likely to get funding. If you're not, you're a little less likely unless it's a unique kind of situation. So I don't want to tell you this isn't already in progress, because it really is. We established that in OMB in 2003, 2004, and the existing administrator has continued those efforts, certainly in mine and others' absence.
To make this more effective, should this position be a cabinet level position?
I don't know that it has to be a cabinet level position. It has to sit at the table at the right time with the cabinet leadership in order to be able to affect the change. Yes. If there was, one of the tools that I used was the President's Management Council, which is the deputy secretaries, and right now those are quote unquote the de facto COOs. That is an effective forum for the conversation, but ultimately the miracle will happen when the President turns not to the CTO, but turns to the cabinet official that is responsible for the initiative, like the Secretary of Treasury, and says, what are you doing on this? And the Secretary of Treasury turns to the CTO and says, we're fully on board and have the tools at our disposal to make this happen, and here's the result. So it's really the President turning to the owner of that mission and saying, how are you doing? They're able to acquit that pretty clearly and have the CTO sitting there at their right hand.
The Center for Strategic and International Studies has issued a comprehensive set of recommendations for the incoming president. How familiar are you with this, and does it make sense to you? Is this something of a good blueprint, or is it a distraction?
The report I'm most familiar with was the one that was released last week on cybersecurity.
Yes.
And by the way, I think that is an excellent report. It certainly mirrors the experience, and what was documented in that report mirrors my experience when I was in this position. The thing that I would suggest is that every time you create a new effort, you don't need to create another CXO. So my recommendation would be is the CTO is the person that's leveraging technology, affecting cyber impact on mission processes. One of the key issues in terms of transparency and privacy is cybersecurity. And so I do think that the approach and the policy depicted in the cybersecurity report, the CSIS cybersecurity report that was generated last week, is an excellent template.
There is a group of technology, public affairs groups, and consumer groups under the umbrella, and they sent a letter to the President-elect. In fact, the Free Press group kind of headed up the effort, and this is one of the things they said specifically looking at the President-elect when it comes to technology. The letter said, we urge you to send strong proponents of the public interest who will embrace and enact the policy proposals you made on the campaign trail to shape the future of media, the internet, and the economy, and our democracy. Together we have a unique opportunity to break with the past, lift the stranglehold industry lobbyists have had on communications policy, and put the public policies first. They put up lobbyists in this whole effort. Does that factor into what will eventually become the CTO's office, and do lobbyists have an impact there?
Well, again, that is a matter for the President and policy of the administration, and I would defer to what this President-elect has said as far as the role of lobbyists. Certainly it's part of the system within which that we all operate. But again, the policy clarity comes from strong direction, understanding what the specific requirements are, what the current situation is, and moving forward. And I don't think that is going to be any more of a distraction than it is normally.
The government up to this point has been essentially running two parallel families of IT systems, with national security systems on one side and non-national security on the other, each with their own set of regulations and requirements. Does it make sense to continue a recent effort to harmonize these two systems and bring them together under one set of standards? Or do we need to keep the national security systems separated out and deal with them separately from the rest of our systems?
Again, I would support and defer to the recommendation of that cybersecurity report, which suggests that there should be integration across civilian, DoD, and intelligence, and I strongly support that. The fact of the matter is, in order to protect this country, there has to be integration amongst those verticals, if you will. And further, the ubiquity of the network, the technology that we have at our disposal right now is capable of giving us the level of security. At the same time, we allow for transparency and privacy. So that horse is completely out of the barn as far as I'm concerned, and there needs to be integration of standards across that entire network.
This will be a creation by the president-elect, but how does Congress factor into the CTO's job?
Hugely important. And I have to say, reflecting on my time there, if there was an area for improvement for me personally in that position, I could have done a much better job of reaching out to the Congress and communicating with them. If you recall the eGov Act of 2003, I think on an annual basis we were supposed to get $5 million. We were appropriated $1.75. You know, we didn't get very much money. That's a symptom. I mean, that is in fact a symptom of the fact that we could have done a better job. I think there has to be a key partnership. And by the way, the administrator has been reaching out. There is an annual report that's generated to the Hill now on the efforts that are being made in e-government, for instance. But this key position has to be very, very close to the Hill. And again, if you look at the themes that are most important to us right now, that is not going to be a difficult thing to do because the Hill is actively engaged in all of those. But that's very, very important role for this position.
Why did you leave the position?
I left the position for two reasons. First of all, I had some personal reasons. If you know what those positions are like, they're like dog years. And so certainly there was family issues and so forth and so on. But frankly, I felt like I had achieved probably all I was going to achieve in the position, and it was time for me to move on to something else. I am very optimistic that the incoming administration is going to create an environment where whoever in this position, properly sourced, properly positioned, is going to be a very, very effective position for the new administration.
You've described a very broad range of requirements and challenges that any CTO is going to have to face. Can one man effectively do this without being stretched too thin? I mean, and I know there's a staff. It's not one individual person sitting behind a desk with a phone.
Well, obviously, and I have to say to you, you know, since I left the CTO position, it's not like what I did before I did by myself either. So, I mean, nothing's changed. There's a wonderful group of current politicals as well as careerists. The architecture community, the CIO council, all those folks have been pushing forward with wonderful progress in areas. Those things are in place. They're like levers in the hands of the person that's coming into this position. This doesn't need to be constructed from scratch by any means. But, you know, again, the only thing that can burden this new position is focusing, it's an oxymoron, focusing on too many things, right? Not focusing on the vital few.
Lorentz served as the Federal Chief Technology Officer from 2002 to 2003. And William Jackson is a senior writer for Government Computer News. To both of you, thanks for being on the Communicators.
Thank you.
Thank you.